As we give, we gain, say the lyrics in the song. And I really like these words because I think they speak to a kind of radically alternative form of economics, one not based on a purely transactional relationship, not a zero-sum game. Here we are gathering to bear witness to this radical idea. Good morning. I am David Balkovin. I'm your worship associate this morning. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. If a visual description would be helpful, I am a shorter than average middle-aged white guy with absolutely no hair at all. And I am wearing a plaid shirt that has sort of green and grays in it. And I'm wearing my worship associate stole. If today is your first time being with us, becoming with us, thank you for being here and just being the awesome muse that you are. If you feel comfortable, would you be willing to wave your hand or possibly even stand so that we know who you are? Great. If you're sitting next to someone who just raised their hand, it could be your special privilege to be the first one to greet them. Zoom friends, we are glad that you're here with us, and our tech team will be dropping a copy of the order of service and a visitor form in the chat if they haven't done so already. And whether you're joining us online or in person, you're invited to take part in our Joys and Sorrows ritual a little bit later in the service. Zoom friends, you're welcome to begin adding your joys and sorrows to the chat at any time. And for those in the sanctuary, you're also welcome at any time to add your joys and sorrows to our book. And then we also have separate pages over there, so more than one person can be adding at the same time. It's okay. You can do that now. You won't offend me if you feel like doing that during the service. But we'll also set aside time to do that as well. Now, let us enter into a time of worship by lighting the flaming chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. And we're using words from Amy Williams Clark. Thank you, Marilyn, for coming up to do that. We gather in this time of uncertainty, full of unknowns, as angst closes in upon us. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the dankness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our interconnection. For this moment, this radical moment, we find a certainty within the noble bonds of love and community. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our visiting speaker, the Reverend Melanie Oommen, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Good morning. I'm so pleased to be here this morning. I guess the best way to introduce myself to this community is that I'm a neighbor. I live about 4 blocks away, and I have for 27 years, even before the church landed in our neighborhood. I am a minister in the United Church of Christ, which is, we have historical and kind of ancestral roots, our denominations, and I was a pastor in town at First Congregational United Church of Christ for 22 years, ending that ministry in 2019. And we did a lot of wonderful collaborations, this congregation and First Congregational. And probably most well-known to many of you is our collaborations with the Our Whole Lives Comprehensive Sexuality Education Curriculum. I see some heads nodding. I continue to train trainers in Our Whole Lives, and I want to share that in July, at our national gathering for the United Church of Christ, we celebrated with the UUA 25 years of that collaboration of Our Whole Lives. So that was a beautiful, beautiful moment, and I understand at your national gathering this year, you're going to do such a celebration as well, and there'll be some crossover of folks between our 2 denominations. Currently, I serve in the national ministries of the United Church of Christ. I've done all of my ministry, unlike most ministers, right, who move around a lot, living in the same house in the same city. So I feel really privileged to be really anchored in this community. But now my ministry is actually national in scope, and it's a lot of training and coaching, and I work with the folks who support ministers. And that's a big job these days. There's a lot of challenges in ministry, as I know you well know. So I'm privileged to do that work. It's beautiful work. And I mentioned to Jen a couple months ago, I sure do miss preaching. And I think that's how I landed here today. So lots of familiar faces around, and lots of new people to get to know today. I'm so grateful to be here. So we gather this morning, weary and joyful, broken and beautiful, and we affirm simply by showing up in this sanctuary of care that we are not alone, that we have never been alone. And we celebrate that we're all messily and wonderfully woven into the very fabric of shared human life. And into this weaving, we bring what we have to share. Things we have yet to discover about ourselves, our passions and truths and struggles, the things that make us ridiculous and fabulous, trusting that whoever we are, from wherever we have come, we are enough, and we have enough, and there is more than enough for all. And so we are called to worship.
Thank you. And now for our joyous and or not joyous and sorrows, that's later. Time for all ages. For the time for all ages part of this service, Reverend Melanie is actually going to be reading a story or telling a story. And so if you are, let's see, if you are someone who would like to get a little closer, and I see that they're on their way now, please come on up and grab a carpet rectangle and take a seat.
That's awesome. Great. Here we go. I can kind of, great. I think this is on. Yes, it is. Good. And if you want to move in a little closer so you can see better, you can certainly do that. Good. And we can see ourselves up there too, right? I was so worried, what if they can't see us? But then there's a screen. So I'm Melanie. It's certainly very nice to meet you. I wonder if you think that it's hard for people to share. I see a couple heads nodding, even a hand raised. Yeah, you think it's hard for. Why do you think it's hard for people to share? Do you have any thoughts about that? You might even think about like why you find it hard for yourself to share, but we can generalize it. Sharing tiles. Was it challenging or? Okay. Why was it challenging? No. Okay. Well, maybe just sit with that question. So, what did you want to say something?
It's nice to share and be kind and also say and take turns.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And even though sometimes it's hard, in the end, it can feel like the right thing to do and actually not so hard after all. So once upon a time, there was a traveler. And the traveler went from city to city. And when they arrived in a city, they would, or a community, or a small town, or even like a tiny little village, they would rely on the generosity of other people for a place to stay for the night and for food to eat. And one time they went into a town and they asked someone, do you know if there's a place where I could stay tonight? And the person was too busy. They were moving on. And they said, well, what about something to eat? And they threw over their shoulder, oh, no, there's no extra here. So the traveler asked a number of people and got similar responses. There wasn't anything extra. There was nothing to share. There was no place where they could spend the night. So the traveler said, a little bit loudly, in the middle of the town, I'm going to make stone soup. And somebody walking by overheard the traveler say that and stopped and said, well, what is stone soup? And the traveler said, I'm so glad you asked. So the traveler just happened to have a pot, like the one I have right here. And the traveler said, so the way you make stone soup is you take a stone, anyone will do, and you put it in the pot, and then you pour water in. I don't have water to pour in, but you can imagine. And then you wait. So a few more people gathered, and a few more people, and they looked, and they waited, because they were curious, right? And then the traveler said, after sitting there for a while, you know, this would be even better if we had some heat. Does anybody have like a little stove that we could put under the pot? And someone was like, yeah, actually, I have a little camp stove. So they brought that. And then they started to see the water boil. And then the traveler said, as they looked and looked into the pot, you know what makes the stone soup even more delicious is some onion. Does anybody have an onion? There's a friend. And somebody said, yeah, I have an onion. And then someone else said, you know, I like potatoes in my soup. Does that stone soup have potatoes? And the traveler said, it sure could have potatoes. Does anybody want to share some potatoes? And little by little, the soup started to get a little thicker with potatoes and carrots, a little bit of meat. What do you all like in your soup? Is there something you like to find in soup that makes you really excited? Like tortellini or I don't know, mushy peas? Maybe not. Lentils, oh, a little extra protein, that's good. So person after person in this town were bringing things, and soon the soup pot was overflowing, like there was no more room to put anything in. And the traveler said, I think we're done. I think it's time to eat the soup. So everyone ran and got bowls, and at this point, pretty much the whole village was in the town square, ready to eat the soup. And everyone got a bowl and tried the soup. It was delicious. And in fact, a lot of people had seconds because they were a little bit extra hungry. And they had their second course of soup. And still, there was soup left over. And then the traveler emptied the pot, took the pot, and went on their way with the soup, with the stone. And that's a story of stone soup. So what do you think happened? What happened in that story? Yeah. They were hungry and they made stone soup. And how did they make that soup? With help from everyone else. Yeah. Do you think it was easier for the people to share when they each gave something and they knew everybody else was sharing too? I wonder if sometimes that makes it a little bit easier to share. Well, I really enjoyed sharing this story with you, and I'm glad to meet you all. I have been here before, but it's been a long time, and I don't think that I've met any of you before, so I'm so glad to have this time with you together. And I hope that the story of stone soup might be something you think about the next time you're invited to share, because sometimes it just takes one person to be generous for more generosity to flow. And before you know it, you have a soup pot that's overflowing. Into the stillness we settle, recognizing the named aloud and the names we hold in our hearts. Those for whom we have concern, the concerns we have for our own lives. Our stories, all of our stories, struggles and celebrations, deserving of time and space and compassion and community. Bringing a serenity that this world doesn't give and this world can't take away. So we hold our concerns for each other, the named and the unnamed, in our minds, in our love, in our collective caring, knowing that we are held by a spirit of love and generosity that is unending, so that in this circle of caring, each may find healing and strength and connection in being known in this great circle of love. Into this stillness we settle. Amen. Before I launch into the next part of what we're doing together, I just want to thank David for his beautiful work as worship associate this morning. It's really been a joy to get to know him and the whole worship team, but David really has put in a lot of time and work and is a very skillful leader, and it's been a joy. So thank you, David. Yeah. So, the parable, another fancy word for story, of the loaves and fishes is also known as the feeding of the multitude. And it's the only story of Jesus in the Christian New Testament that is repeated in all 4 books that account for Jesus' life, that are called the Gospels of the Jesus story. So the writers of the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each tell a slightly different version of this story in slightly different ways to different audiences, but the stories are so similar that it's easy to recognize that it's the same story. And the thread that is solid and holds each telling is the priority of tending to others with compassion. Since these stories originated not in writing, but in the oral tradition, we can gather that this story was especially treasured by and told over and over and over again until it was captured eventually in written form. Individuals, too, like communities, have stories that really live in us. The stories with resonant spiritual truths that take up residence in us. I bet you have a few of those stories in your own life. I know I do. Stories that form your life with some sort of wisdom that make you a better person somehow. And I think this was such a story, not only for those early Christians, but one that has endured in the diaspora of the Christian community, but also in our larger cultural vernacular, which is why I chose it this morning, because even if this isn't a part of your spiritual heritage or ancestry, it may be a story that you have heard. Whether it's familiar or not, may our hearts and minds be open to the spiritual food that is offered in this sacred text by the telling of it. But before I actually get to the story, I need to say a word about context, because in this telling from Matthew's gospel, this version of the story is important for how we hear it. Jesus has just received news that his cousin, John the Baptist, who has been a steady and influential companion throughout his life, has been murdered by an unscrupulous king who was threatened by John's bravery and willingness to stand up to the powers that be. So it is in this needless and unjust loss that falls on Jesus as we begin the story. And now I'm reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Now, when Jesus heard the news about John's murder, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." The disciples replied, "But we don't have anything here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Well, bring them here to me." And then he invited the crowds to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate, and all were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were more than 5,000 people. May the spiritual wisdom of this sacred text be received with gratitude and care, honoring the ancestors that have preserved this story for us for generations. I believe it was 2009, wasn't it, when the news went out that the Unitarian Universalist Church of Eugene was uprooting from your South Eugene location and moving into this neighborhood. I had heard that this congregation had outgrown the former space and was ready to move into a more central location. And even still, I was surprised to learn about this choice of property. How many of you were in this congregation in 2009? Nice. That's great. So a lot of you probably remember what this building looked like when it was purchased. The rest of you, I'm going to just describe it a little bit for you because it didn't look anything like this. That's spoiler alert. Maybe you even saw some pictures of it pre-2009. But to put it bluntly, it was a big, square, windowless, brick, fortress-like building. No windows, hard to see where there were any doors. What it was built to protect, I cannot even speculate. It was the Scottish Rite Mason Center, so maybe there were things that needed to be shielded from the public. I'm not really sure, but it was an interesting choice to build a huge building without any windows. I think this building was just the sort of building the word edifice was created for. All building, no messing around. What intrigued and impressed me was how a community protected in a pristinely wooded home on 40th and Donald, tucked away from the bustle of Eugene, made a decision to uproot from that beautiful space with trees and fresh air to here, to a windowless building on the corner of 13th and Chambers. As an outsider, just a neighbor looking in, it was a decision that communicated something. And what it said to me is that there were hearts and minds that were willing to take some risks, to grow in some new ways, to receive possibilities for growth and ministry that would be newly possible in such a location as 13th and Chambers. There is a whole story there that I don't know, and I'm sure you all could tell, that is complex. But I'm just telling you, from my perspective as a neighbor, I was curious. So it was probably in the spring of 2010, after the purchase of the building was final and the remodeling had begun, I was on a walk in the evening, and I noticed that the door on this side of the building, was probably like right here, was open. And since there weren't any windows to peer into, I took it upon myself to peer in the doors. And I looked in, and let me say again, it looked nothing like this. I don't think there was a single wall. It was just open. Everything had been sort of, whatever had been in here was torn away. And it was, talk about an empty canvas. Like anything could be imagined in this space. And I was curious and actually really excited to see what would unfold in my neighborhood. And unfold it has. The windowless brick edifice is no longer. It is evolved into this, a really warm and welcoming space with so many windows and doors, so many opportunities for invitation, rooms for dreaming and creating and meaningful conversation. Children's play spaces and beautiful plants have flourished on these grounds. And it's become a gathering place where it's very clear to anyone in the neighborhood and beyond that all are welcome here, and even to join in a bigger vision than any of us could muster alone. As just a neighbor in the neighborhood, I've attended memorial services here, fundraisers for community organizations, parties, organizing meetings. I've enjoyed concerts, and I've admired art on these walls. I've been blessed to gather with you in worship over the years, and for a couple years, Joe graciously allowed me to sing with the chalice choir here, and that was lovely. I've eaten meals here, I've drank your coffee, it's very good, and I, more than anything, have experienced kindness and friendship. Kind of a miracle, isn't it, really? This place, how at some point, a vision was sparked that led to decisions to dig deeply into shared values, to embrace really a spirit of possibility, of change, to imagine a new space where bodies and spirits could be nurtured and thriving of our community could be nurtured. This isn't a small thing. In a world that would like us to fall into habits of individualism and isolation, that would like for all of us to live in windowless buildings where we don't see our neighbors or invite anyone in. We didn't realize it then, but now we know that this neighborhood needed the Unitarian Universalist Church of Eugene. We needed you to move in 2009, and this congregation, you have become an essential part of the thriving of this community. And this community has even greater needs and gifts than when you first moved in. And the challenges of the times in which we are living can leave us quite unmoored, can it? So even more important, the ways that community can be planted like this community here on the corner of 13th and Chambers. This sturdy church rooted in values that gives form and life to generosity and justice. And I appreciate the comfortable chairs too, I have to say. That was a good choice. Jesus too was living in such unmoored and unsettled times. And he enters today's story from a particular place of terrible loss and sorrow. Of fear for his own life, we can speculate, and certainly for the survival of his community. Weighted with the news that someone who had been brave, truth-telling, spoke truth to power, his life was taken away by greed and arrogance, and a system that was rooted in disregard for human life, especially those on the margins. So like so many times in Jesus' journey, I can imagine the temptation was real to give up, to forge another way that wasn't so hard and so risky. But here's the thing, the story tells us that while Jesus withdrew to a quiet place alone, he was never really alone, for the crowds followed him into this hard time because they knew that hope and healing was possible, and that kept them going. And there was no turning back once you know what's possible. And the fact that he received the crowds with compassion, even in the depths of sorrow and fear, is a choice, isn't it? When he couldn't see the way forward, the community pressed in anyway, and healing happened, and I don't think it was one direction. He did not turn away from his identity as the compassionate healer, and the community he was in called that forth from him. So it's not too surprising that late in the day, when Jesus looked out to see the hunger of the crowds and the disciples who were weary and hungry too, he could see the temptation to slide into old habits. Go let them find their own food. There's a whole town full of food trucks right down the road, said the disciples. And when there is challenge, there is opportunity, right? And Jesus saw opportunity to remember that the one who stirred the very waters of creation, the infinite imagination, gave them courage to take the next step, to take a deep breath, an even deeper breath, and imagine something better than just getting by on your own. And he saw right there a moment to call forth collective compassion, to meet the real needs of real people. And that moment in our story reminds us that by the power of compassion, by the grace of big love, we can creatively meet the needs of our community, and somehow there is more than enough when we draw in together to meet the moment, this one and the next. So what is the miracle in the loaves and fishes story? Is it that somehow magically what looked like scarcity became abundance? Was it that in a weary moment there was still more imagination left? That what seemed like the only way gave over to a new reality of something more generous, something more joyful? Was the miracle that they were even there at all, gathered in the aftermath of an act of political violence that was meant to silence and repress? And rather than succumb, instead, a spirit was unleashed to extend more grace and more healing and strengthen the human bonds of care? Or is the miracle that this story has become an ancestral memory that has shaped communities into a more generous shape, even and maybe especially in times of adversity? Is the miracle that we still tell the story in truth, timeless, and enduring? After 25 years in ordained ministry that has been very localized and focused on the needs and gifts of this particular community, my ministry now is national in perspective. And I see that the challenges that are being faced by local congregations are shared across our national landscape and transcend our denominations. There's a lot that we all have in common in these days. Models of ministries that used to work, but they don't work like they once did. Sources of funding changing. Churches being called upon to be nimble, to extend further, to change in ways that feel sometimes unfamiliar and disorienting, but also exciting. And also pondering whether they have what it takes to meet this moment and the next. But one thing I am learning, and this might surprise absolutely no one, that none of this is ahistorical, meaning that faith communities that are finding change hard now tend to have always found it hard to change. And that communities that are able to nurture a spirit of generosity and willingness to take risks, to extend and grow, not surprisingly, are those that have practiced these traits. And those gifts that have been long cultivated often surprise even the congregation themselves with the newness that can emerge. And I see in you such a congregation as this, dear neighbors, having traveled through difficulties and successes with clarity of purpose and deep rootedness in purpose. Dear neighbors, I know I don't need to tell you this, but the needs of our community and our world for sanctuary, for compassion, for big dreams and material hope are real and not going away anytime soon. So may we all hold one another a little tighter, dream a whole lot bigger, and remember that the Spirit that turned 5 meager loaves and 2 little fish into a feast for thousands is with you and will not let you go. 15 years ago, on a gentle evening, I stood right there and peered into this space. And what did I see? A miracle unfolding, beam by beam, loaf by loaf, with complexity and struggle. But perhaps that's what makes it all the more miraculous, right? These stories, these walls have stories to tell, don't they? A shared story born of a great spirit of love, of what can happen when we move from fear to trust, from cynicism to hope, from self-interest to compassion, from self-preservation to joyful generosity. And in each twist and turn of this unfolding story, know that you are enough, more than enough, and that Spirit has supplied enough for those who went before, and Spirit faithfully abides with you. Until we are together again. So go forth in peace, hope, joy, and love, and until the next time, take good care.